Everyone, welcome back to Manufacturing Hub on this Wednesday afternoon. If you guys are new here, welcome. If you've been here before, welcome back. Maybe our longest of long-time listeners will have remembered Billy's first episode, which was all the way back on episode 23. Now, I feel like I've seen Billy a couple of times since then in person. We've had a couple of conversations, and I go back, and it's been almost 200 episodes. It's been 190 episodes since we've had you on, Bill. And so we're super excited to go have a conversation, catch up on what you've been doing, and go dive into this wild and hopefully wonderful world of AI and AI applications and what it is that you have been doing on this side. I won't. I won't dig in too far until we go, but I will let our listeners know after you and I had this conversation on our prep call. As Vlad has heard, I'm like, well, I think I need to seriously go reconsider how I'm using or maybe not using some of these tools. So I'm excited to have it. I do want to let everyone know if you are listening and following along, this is a live, interactive, fun show. Please feel free to go ahead and drop messages in the chat. Please feel free to go ahead and say hi. Let us know where you are physically in the world if you're using some of these AI tools. If you have questions for Billy or Vlad or myself, please feel free to go ahead and ask those. If there are questions that we can go ahead and bring in, we will go bring in and go ask those questions to Billy. If there are other super technical questions, we'll probably go take those offline. But without further ado, everyone, welcome to Manufacturing Hub. This is episode 213. Billy, welcome back to the show. Thank you for coming back.
Thanks so much for having me again. Honestly, that was such a long time ago being on the show. But at the same time, it almost feels like yesterday. And I've been seeing you guys pump out the shows too, so it's been kind of exciting watching you guys do your thing and grow your channel. So, I appreciate the invite back.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for taking the time. Before we dive into the very interesting topic of AI, Billy, could you give us a bit of a reintroduction? It's been a while, so just curious, ultimately, how did you get into the space of manufacturing? What have you been doing? And ultimately, maybe what you are doing today.
Yeah. So my background, I started in technology when I was a kid. I won't go through my full life story here, but um, one thing led to another. I went through the military, got some money for school, ended up going through engineering. And engineering school is really what brought me into manufacturing. My undergrad's in mechanical engineering, my master's is in robotics. But I'll disclaimer that with it's really advanced manufacturing is what my master's was centered around. And I started doing that while I was at Pratt and Whitney for a long time and got involved with a lot of the advanced technology organizations where they've really taught me the foundation of everything that I've brought along with me in my career to this day. There's probably not a day that goes by that I don't reference, something I learned from the team back at Pratt because of how good they were. You know, Truth be told, I really miss those guys. So so you know, I got into engineering, I got into manufacturing, and ever since I got into manufacturing, it's just one opportunity has led to another, and I've kind of stuck around for the last 15 years because it's an exciting, field industry. You get exposure to most of the advanced technologies on the planet, and someone's always looking for a creative way to implement them.
Good. And I guess like bringing us to today, there's obviously going to be some very interesting discussion topics, right? But could you give us maybe a bit of a snapshot? What have you been doing? Maybe in a general sense, what have you been deploying and working on?
Yeah, so I'd say my last 6, 7 years have been really centered around the digital transformation space, where companies are looking to bring in more modern technologies, more different softwares. Traditionally, it's really just been for the most part software upgrades, but then they're trying to get into the data ingestion piece of it, which is really just connecting pieces of software so that you can share data across your enterprise. And and I've been doing that for 5 years, and then 2 years ago, 3 years ago, ChatGPT got released, and and the day that that happened, that kind of changed my perspective on technology. It wasn't that it was anything that we hadn't seen before. It was a chatbot. And I kind of like making the joke, that little paperclip that used to be in Microsoft,
Yeah.
Zippy, something like that.
Hmm.
But it was, the same contextual idea where you had this assistant that you could talk to and hopefully get useful information out of. And and that day that it really got released, I think it was like 3.5, maybe one of the major releases. I sat there and kind of drilled it on everything that I do in my day to day, just so I could find out how useful it was. And it was eye-opening experience. And I've had this conversation with a number of people when I'm kind of explaining how I got into AI. And a lot of people still haven't taken that step into, even ChatGPT, it's a chat interface at face value. But just taking that step into understanding if it actually can help you, what it knows about what you do. I drilled it on everything that I do, and it could, produce useful information faster than I could. It could articulate it better. It could structure it better. So even just as an assistant, if you will, to help you get your thoughts in order, it was amazing. And and that kind of changed my perspective on how I approached myself in industry and what I do for, companies that bring me
Hmm.
in. More of these tools changes how you advise people that you work with. It changes how you approach looking at solutions, things that you might want to bring to manufacturing, and it helps you really fully understand the abilities of, maybe not, watching these tools evolve over time. OpenAI started embedding tool set. It didn't have image generation at first, now it does. It didn't have code interpreter at first, now it does. And
Hmm.
so it's starting to evolve into something much more useful than a chatbot. And I, the more the more useful and the more ways I see it being used in industry. So that just kind of evolved into these more modern tools like the IDEs with agents involved, embedded in, and and it's really changed fundamentally, like what I do, when I'm consulting tools, companies. Uh, I, I've seen the power of it. I've seen the usefulness of it. I try to help everyone kind of understand the impact that they can truly have on your operations. Um, you know, our conversation right before we start there, and so I've grown into roles where I'm constantly looking for opportunities to bring in these newer tools because long term, I think companies that are able to successfully bring these into their organization safely and ethically, that they're going to be the ones leading their industry, their respective industry.
Billy, let me ask you a follow-up question. I sent you a note on the chat. Maybe double check the mic settings really quick. But I'm curious, and maybe to take a quick step back into the definition of AI, right? Because there's no shortage of different applications. But I guess my perspective is there's still sort of I don't want to say the older models, but the ML AI models used for regression analysis and sort of numerical or statistical processing of data. There's now generative AI, right? So generative meaning the chatbots that we're talking about, and now there's, I want to say, newer wave, which is agentic AI, right, where you deploy maybe agents. So when we're going to be talking, I guess, about some of these applications, are there certain buckets that we can, or I guess how would you define AI that you're discussing? And I would also maybe ask for a definition of agentic AI, because I'm just now trying to learn a little bit better where the line truly lies, because some of them seem like wrappers for ChatGPT, or like what is an agent truly capable of, I guess, is the question.
Yeah, and again, let me know if my volume is cutting in and out, but
Hmm.
generative AI, that's definitely going to be your first bucket. Those are your typical open AI like ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, Grok. most of those that you just ask it for something and it generates it. And then you have agents. Agents are capable of doing things, meaning taking it farther than just generating the content. That means I use Cursor as one of my main integrated development environments, my IDE.
Mhm.
And so I ask it to develop me a script, it can actually create a file, write this, and then I have my IDE set to kind of do whatever you want mode. So scripts and run commands in my command line. So it's not just generating content, it's physically doing stuff for me. I no longer have to type in commands to my command line. It can create files, it can remove files, create directories, create databases. And so that's kind of like the two that I would probably say, because you're using what you call wrapper, and there's a ton of them out there, and we'll actually probably talk about a couple, like,
Mhm.
that create, it's a video generator, if you will, but essentially you type into a front end, it sends some information to the back end and brings, so generally, uh, can you guys hear me?
Yep.
I can hear you now. Yes.
Awesome. Yeah, sorry, had to get rid of my headphones. So yeah, I mean, there's if you really break it down into the categories, there's generative AI, which simply generates content, and then you have agentic AI, which literally does stuff for you. Now there's different tools on the back end that increase and decrease these things capabilities. Things like LangChain, if you've ever heard of that, that's where you string together a series of different AI models that can then do different things for a large scale project, or even small scale projects if you're just like trying to test out and get proof of concepts off the ground.
So let me ask you maybe a last question before I send it over to Dave. I've started experimenting with a couple of tools on the agent side, right? And I guess my question for you, Billy, is how loosely defined can you make certain tasks, right? Because I have been very verbose into what I would like to have built, right, on both on the, let's say, front end and back end sides. And unless I tell it very specifically, obviously there needs to be multiple iterations. Do you see a world where I can just say, hey, you're a software engineer within this manufacturing company? It obviously has a very little context, but your goal is to just improve the business, right? And then it on its own almost creates the apps that it wants. Like, are we as close to that today, or is that maybe the future?
I love this question. This is literally my favorite question. Now, I may or may not receive backlash for this answer, right? Depending on what you're actually trying to do, we're already there. Now, it depends on the scale at which you're trying to do it. There's tools out there like Replit, maybe Figma, where they can take drawings and turn them into full-blown websites. And all you got to do is give it basically a drawing. And there's really no coding. I mean, it's like all drag and drop. Now, that's kind of custom pre-built front-end tools that you can use to do that. Now, if you're talking about developing from scratch, that's where we start getting into your tech stack that you're using. Me personally, I use Cursor AI. You'll probably hear me say Cursor a bunch of times. I'm typically referring to the IDE. And all that is a VS Code fork. I'm not sure if anyone knows, but you can go to GitHub, VS Code, source code's on there. You can take it, make it your own. That's basically what this company did. Now, they've recently I'll say Anthropic recently developed a tool called MCP, which are, for lack of better words, it's like giving your AI agent a tool bag. And so if I wanted to build something for me, like say I want a software as a service website and I need authentication, and I also don't want to have to back these things up. I want it to do all of it without me asking it. It can one-shot these kind of builds. Now, depending on, and just for clarity, anytime I say one shot, that just typically means you prompt it one time and it's going to build and give you like some kind of finished product. Now, the level of that finished product, or the, how good you want it to look, that's going to vary. Like you would just essentially have to take what it actually builds. So, at face value, yeah, we're there where the tools can actually do those kind of things. But that's not to say that it's going to be perfectly, you may or may not be happy with what it is. Functionally, probably will be there. And then, it's more like you get your foundation built in place, and then you probably spend a few days actually perfecting it and getting it into a form that's probably good for one of your clients.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yep. Absolutely.
I think that makes sense. And I think that goes to one of the questions, and perhaps one of my, I don't know if struggles is the right thing, but we'll use the phrase struggles with the concept of this is, where does it start? Where does it end? Is a chat GPT or a cursor AI, is it like a junior engineer? Is it like a virtual assistant level of, we give them Google and our knowledge base, and they can go ahead and provide this? Is it like a senior engineer and I go in and do a little bit of polishing, and we can go ship um, kind of any sort of solution? Can you tell us a little bit more about what you're seeing, and maybe what you're seeing now versus what you saw a couple of years ago? And I guess I would love after that if we could walk through an example on either the coding side or the ChatGPT side, just kind of an example of what you're seeing and maybe how you're using it. Billy, please.
Yeah, you're actually getting into, I'll say, a fundamental cultural conversation that's happening in the industry right now. Um, I, I'm a part of a small community of extremely advanced developers, I would say, and if you go to LinkedIn, you see people saying we don't need junior developers, or junior developer roles are disappearing. And then you have the other side where it's like, well, how do you become a senior developer if you don't start out as a junior developer? And honestly, I believe this because what I'm about to say is like true. Like in industry, there's a number of people out there that are extremely good at coding, but I'm seeing a shift to where everyone is slowly shifting into having AI assistants with coding because it's faster, and people will probably say that it generates 10,000 lines of code, and 8,000 of them are garbage. I've seen those examples. It's a meme at this point. But that doesn't mean that you can't generate useful software with these that are that can be made production ready with a relatively short period because of your own skill in coding. So I think anyone from junior developers to principal or staff engineers would benefit from using these tools, and I think long term probably will be. And what I'm seeing more often now is with the guys that are actually extremely, extremely good with coding, they're becoming more of a product designer and less of a software developer. Because with these tools, if you're, at that level of coding capability, you kind of see the whole build from front to back. You typically know all of the different pieces that will go into it, things like authentication. And if you can one-shot prompt an AI assistant to put that capability into your software, and it pretty much knocks it out of the park, and it takes you an hour to perfect it, they're now looking at the whole stream or the whole build holistically, and less so maybe just one piece of it. So I'm rapidly seeing different levels of different people using these tools to really increase, I would say, their productivity or their output or even their own capabilities. For the junior engineers that might be listening to this, and I do this once a week, twice a week, I know this happens to me every single week. I will reach a point in a build where I don't know something. I will say, you know what, I've actually never done that. And I will go into Cursor and I will have it build me a curriculum centered around whatever it is I'm trying to do. And when I say curriculum, you can give it context so that you can learn within a given period of time. If you say, I want to spend the next hour learning this, it can build you a curriculum, give you very concrete examples, maybe leave the theory out of it, but give you practical applications of how you bring these technologies into your build safely and be able to actually troubleshoot them if something was to go wrong.
In
So,
Cursor, you can do that in Cursor directly?
yes,
Interesting.
yes.
Okay.
And it can build out examples for you. It can build out your whole curriculum. I don't know if I have it readily available right now, but I actually built out a curriculum in C++ because I was testing it. It was literally a test build. I was like, you know, I wonder how good this can actually get. And I'll be open. It's hard for me to read textbooks. Like if it's a text or a tech manual, I got it all day long. I will read it. But a textbook, it's difficult for me to sit there. So I would just have it build me out a 3-week curriculum, exams, quizzes, and coding examples. And not only that, it can give you the actual scripts because you're using an agent. And for anyone that doesn't know, if you're using Cursor or Windsurf, which are both, you know, kind of competitors right now, they have ChatGPT built into it, Claude, Gemini. That most of the major models that are on the market are already embedded in the platform, and it's all like it's very low cost. So you get access to basically whichever model you're probably typically coding with, and it can really just kind of do whatever you want. So for the junior engineers, if you want to get to that level, it's incredibly powerful for speeding up the speed, or, you know, increasing the speed at which you can actually learn what is required from you at those levels. And it can teach you real time. Did that answer your question? Hope I didn't get too deep on that.
No, I think it's interesting, and I will let the listeners know. It feels like every time Billy says something and we ask a follow up question, there's another thing to go do some further research on. So yes, I think that's really interesting. Vlad, what are your thoughts?
I was going to ask you, I guess, are you seeing this also in the industrial space? Because for me, manufacturing is naturally, quote unquote, always lagging a little bit behind. So I know we've seen the productivity, of software engineers in the traditional IT space, but you're also seeing groups that are, I want to say, advancing manufacturing software just as rapidly as you'd see elsewhere.
So I would say in the manufacturing space, the AI tools that you come across are typically embedded in the OEM softwares that your company's probably using. Uh,
Mm.
Things like SAP, or or Oracle, Salesforce, Workday. Most of us has heard of these applications. We're kind of familiar with them. I'd say 95% of the Fortune 500 list uses these. And what's happening is these companies are trying to embed AI into their products. Now, that's a different context of using AI than what we've been talking about.
Hmm.
Typically, those companies, when they bring those products into their platform, they're doing it with a very, I think the right word would be focused. Maybe I don't want to say narrow, but like it's not meant to be a catch-all. So they want you to use it a specific way for questions that they might think you might want to prompt it using their software. So it's a different feel than you would get if you were just using like a generative AI client, like on the front end, where you can basically ask it anything and it's probably going to have a general idea of what needs to happen.
Hmm.
So in practice, I'm seeing those show up in software a lot. Um, and I'm not going to say anything. I'll just say like for the most part, it's useful for the context of using it within their software. I think it's probably like the best way to say it.
Yeah.
Now, there's smaller teams that you'll find within manufacturing, and these are the guys that I really love. And we've all heard this name, and we're all probably dumped into this category that I'm about to say, but we are tinkerers. We're the guys on the floor that aren't formal software engineers, or we just know how to pick up tools and build with them. Now I'm starting to see more people like that saying, okay, well, I'm already doing the Power Automate or the Power Suite builds on the side. I've got a little bit of experience. And then you show them a tool like Cursor or Windsurf, and they can just run with it. And they come up with very solid solutions very quickly that are useful for, the production line space.
Mhm.
So that's kind of like two worlds in manufacturing. You have like the formal software OEMs that are actually embedding it. And a lot of this comes down to like corporate policies. A lot of
Yeah.
corporations have policies in place to protect their own data that prevent individuals from using these advanced tools like I use on the outside of work. A lot of the research and development that I do is definitely outside of work because of how far I like to push them and really find out what they're capable of. Because if you're not, I mean, me personally, I like to know what limits I'm going to hit so that I know how useful they are. So having I'll say guardrails in place in environments trying to learn these tools, it's not good for initial learning, but it's good for initial adoptions when you're rolling them out to your workforce, and you need to have those constraints in place so that people can safely use them without, I'll say, wrecking company data or assets.
It's a very interesting dilemma, right? Like, I'll be honest with you, because I think our space, again, has these regulatory red flags. And sometimes, they're obviously justified. And in other cases, they're more of a, I would say, hindrance for advancement, right? You can take as simple of an example of a palletizer program, right? There's thousands of palletizers out there being deployed, but I would be surprised if there's a open source repository of industrial equipment type of programming. So ultimately, that's why, let's say, Cursor is probably not going to be as good in structured text or ladder logic or whatever else. So ultimately, I don't know how that's going to be solved and how that's going to impact learning some of these processes and having context of the actual industrial equipment. But it is an interesting challenge. And if I'm not mistaken, Billy, and you probably know this better than I do, there are some LLMs and I guess some companies that offer a wrapper that is, I want to say, segregated from the main, I guess, like unit, or can be deployed at the edge, and it doesn't necessarily push that information into the main GPT. How does, I guess, like, how does that work? To maybe follow up on the conversation of private data and information.
Yeah, so you're touching on an interesting point that I do like talking about, actually.
Mhm.
I think we would be surprised at what these LLMs have been trained on. They might not have direct access to, say, RS Logic, or any of the Rockwell products, or even robot code, directly,
Mhm.
like embedding controls directly onto hardware or something like that. But all of those codes are built on the same language as everything else. Like underneath the hood, underneath the ladder logic, it's probably, JavaScript or C++ or just C, or maybe assembly language, who knows.
Mhm.
But what I have found with these tools is that until you start actually drilling it in exactly what you're doing, then you don't really know whether or not it has the capabilities to jump into that world that you're in, especially with industrial automation. Some things that I do know is that it has robotics down to a science. Like, if you're doing
Really?
any kind of dynamics, like, it has all of that down to a science. It can build the scripts, and then you can, figure out how to put it into your controller. There's not really much in that space that it can't do. An example is NVIDIA right now. They're training thousands of virtual humanoid robots on 10 years of training overnight because of how powerful their chips have become. I
Hmm.
wasn't sure if I could cuss. Almost cussed there. That was my fault. But
Okay.
but yeah, like, it's really amazing how far even robotics has come with these AI tools, kind of knowing the information that you're going to use to build out the code or the scripts that you're going to use to control your robots. Even with localization things like palletizers, I'll say manipulators, like the 3D workspace. Yeah, it knows all of that. I was surprised at how good it was, because honestly, I went to school for 2 years to learn that, and like this thing just shows up yesterday, and it's like where did you come from? Like, why didn't you go to school? But to your second point, that's where you get into having those LLMs on your floor. I think for a short period of time, when all of these started coming out, they were being released as kind of standalone solutions for companies that actually didn't want to send their data back off to, an enterprise server behind something like OpenAI. But there are smaller language models like Llama. I think that's one of them that's out there, where if you have a very, clean kind of data set that you can push through this, it becomes almost trivial to just jump into Cursor and say, well, here's my data. This is the model I want to use. Can you show me how to actually make all of this work behind the scenes? And then it actually teaches you how to fine tune models so that you can roll them out to your shop floor. And now that's all local. If your data set's local, the only thing actually really going back to the server are your questions that you're asking it, which doesn't require actually sending company data back. It's just asking it instructions on what you're doing locally so that you can connect the two, so that you can get that power right there at the edge. And that's kind of where you're pointing to, things like edge servers and things like that, or maybe just controllers on your shop floor, however you want to deploy them, whether they're PCs or not. All of those capabilities are now possible. And, these tools teach you how to do it overnight. So there's not really a barrier to entry into any of these advanced technologies anymore.
Interesting. I just want to make the point that last night or a couple of nights ago, Vlad and I were playing around with an AI tool and asking it to go build something. And I think Vlad said, go build me something that goes and connects with an HiveMQ MQTT broker and some SQL databases and some other things in there. And I was expecting it to bulk, not knowing what that was, not being able to go do that. But for me, the interesting part is, as it was going and generating that code and generating that front end and everything, at one point it failed, right? Like, it failed to go build or to go make those connections, and then it's like retrying, or maybe we asked it to retry, and it retried, and it went and it completed the build. And so for me, I thought that was very interesting, right? So in that, call it 10 or 20 minutes, it is faster than anyone I know who could go build it. I might know someone who could go build it in 2 hours, but it's someone going and building it in 2 hours versus it populating on the screen while you're in the middle of another conversation. So I thought it was very interesting as to what can become of that. Let me ask you a question though, Billy, of going and in theory deploying these into a manufacturing environment. Is it a technology issue? Is it a security issue? Is it we don't want unknown software coming into our, in theory, secure networks because we don't know who built it and we don't know what might happen with it issue? What is kind of the roadblock or the rub that you're having with some of those groups?
I think the answer to this is kind of like twofold. There's the technology side, which typically has to go through cybersecurity assessments, making sure that you're not able to send company data outside, right? So that's kind of the technical implementation piece. If you can get over the cybersecurity barrier, which is typically helping them understand what it is you're doing and the backend server that you're sending to, that's typically like kind of a easy hurdle to get over, if you will. And I'll just, make a note there, because a lot of companies don't understand that these generative AI tools that we're now using are held to the same standards as every other software as a service platform that they're probably using. Like, every company I've seen in the last 5-10 years all have some form of software as a service tool on their shop floor. It could be, I don't know, loose examples, OEE monitoring. Like, everybody has a software as a service for monitoring OEE because they just don't want to run it locally or differently at every single plant. Those same requirements that it takes to run that software, typically SOC 2 requirements or something like that for these types of platforms, OpenAI Anthropic, Claude, whatever you refer to them as, they all have those same kind of capabilities on the back end. They all protect your data. It's all segregated from other companies' data. They don't train on it. You can turn all of those kind of things off so that you actually get the same level of security as you do using any other tool. So kind of when you show them that cybersecurity hump is no longer a hump. It's kind of like a checkbox, just like any other tool the company would bring in. Now, that's the easy piece. Before you ever get there, though, the company culturally has to be ready. I would say that's the biggest hurdle I see for most companies out there right now. And when I say culturally, I mean having the right governance and individuals responsible for the use of the technology in place. And that's a very large gap across the industry right now. Just having someone at the leadership table that understands the technologies that can help a company safely and ethically bring these in, understand the impacts, and really put a strong support model in place for the use of these tools. That's a whole nother conversation that can take years for a company to get past. So I think that I hope that answers your question. It's like twofold. The technical piece, which is just turns into a checkbox, but culturally, do they have the right mindset? Do they have the right leadership? Do they have the policies and procedures in place? Do they have the training in place? Just all of these typical things that you would find within a Fortune 500 company that allows them to leverage these kind of tools so that they can actually gain the benefits and value of bringing them in.
Absolutely.
Let me ask, if I can ask a follow-up on that side, Billy, right? Do you see a world? So I guess in the industrial automation space and manufacturing, as you know, I feel almost always the largest players have teams capable of, sophisticated, let's call it software development, right? So do you see a world where almost all the players build a lot of these tools and applications internally, or is the opportunity for integrators and OEMs and new startups, guys who have maybe the context to build out these incredibly fast and then bring them to manufacturers, right? Because I think obviously those two scenarios are going to be significantly different from like culture and deployment. And if they see it as, hey, now there's, instead of 2 options for OE, now there's 20 options for OE and 20 options for some other tools. There's just an abundance of solutions, from third parties coming in. Is that what you're seeing, or more of an internal model?
I will say I'm going to try my best not to give you my own personal biased opinion on this.
Okay.
I'm a builder, like through and through. I love building. So there's always an internal battle for me when I'm consulting on whether or not to advise to just let people build on the inside internally, kind of like what you're referring to there, or whether or not to contract it out to, say, someone like, I don't know, DXC or Infosys. You've heard of the big companies like that. Now, what I'm seeing outside of work in my personal community are companies rapidly growing and getting a customer base because they now have the same capabilities as the big OEMs, because they can do it with 5 people instead of 100. And it's creating a lot of small business opportunities. And I genuinely like try to support those guys as much as possible, because they're not wrong in doing it. We're talking about billion-dollar market spaces, like, for software inside of companies, especially manufacturing, like billions of dollars. There's no reason, personal opinion, disclaimer, personal opinion, I don't see a reason the majority of that market should be spread across 10 players. You're talking about people that are good at their crafts, that may not want to work for a big company, and that's fine. People may want their own business. Maybe they want to put some of their friends to work. Maybe they want the opportunities, and there's no reason they shouldn't have them. And so I'm seeing outside of work that those opportunities are there for them to start taking small pieces of the market. And it's happening more and more and more. Like every week, another kid in my community is like, oh, hey, I made my first $1,000 sale. I made my first $5,000 sale. And I'm just like, good for you, man. Like, I'm genuinely happy for you. Like, so, there's always going to be a pull towards smaller companies being able to do it faster and more efficiently. And maybe the bigger players kind of painting a picture of, maybe it's not as safe or maybe it's not as supported, but that's not always necessarily true. Um, so it all also depends on where the company is and what they want to do. I've worked for companies that have the technical skill sets inside of it. So us building it on the inside, no problem. It's like, hey, put 5 of us in a room for 3 days and watch what happens. And you could get incredible solutions. But then I've also worked for companies where they didn't have one technical resource. They just didn't. So their only option was to look externally. And that's where you really have to do what's in the best interest of the company. And really it's not even really like a IT decision. It's kind of an operations decision. How do they want to operate? Do they want to keep that expertise in-house? Do they want to keep developing this long-term? Do they want to sustain it long-term? Because that takes investment, takes time. You build these people up, and more times than none, when people become extremely proficient in this world, they're going to look for better is using that word loosely, but they could look for different opportunities that they might be interested in. And there could be a number of reasons for that. And then the company's stuck with all of this advanced technology that maybe a few people knew how to build. And now the company has kind of like hurt themselves. So again, it comes down to what's in the best interest for the company, how they want to operate, and then internally versus externally, the divide between the bigger companies and the smaller companies is going to slowly start closing more often.
Makes sense.
Interesting. I'd like to talk a little bit more about that change management, but I feel like change management is a 12-hour discussion just on this topic, and I promise to keep it to the last 10 minutes of this conversation. So before we get into that, can we dive a little bit deeper into the tech stack that you, Billy, are using, or at least maybe the high level of the kind of best of different areas of AI solutions that you're using, knowing you've probably tested dozens or hundreds or thousands, or maybe not quite everyone out there, but I'm sure you've had your hands in a bunch of them. Can you share a little bit about what you're using, please?
Yeah, and I was going to prepare a small demo, but I didn't have time after work today to put anything together, so apologies on that. But I will offer it up to you if you want to set up like 30 minutes, and I can actually put together something clean that you guys can that I can walk through, so I'm not stumbling so much and just kind of like fumbling around. And you can take that and release it to your audience. So if that's something you're interested in, just let me know and we can set up some more time.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
in general, I have a number of tools. Obviously, ChatGPT is one of them. Depending on who you ask, everyone's going to have their own flavor. And what I've come to learn, because I've used Grok, Gemini, ChatGPT, Claude, each of them interact with you a certain way. So my front end that I always go to when I need information, it's always ChatGPT, because I have rules built in there. You can actually customize its personality to talk to you a certain way. So I've kind of created a best friend, if you will, that talks to me exactly how I want. It knows exactly how to give me information when I ask for it. And 99% of the time, it's exactly what I'm looking for. So my generative AI go-to is going to be ChatGPT for the foreseeable future. And I don't use things like Operator, because I also have ChatGPT embedded in Cursor, and that's my number 2. So while I'm using generative AI, on the website or the standalone app, for creating the information, maybe project plans, I go into Cursor when I'm actually trying to create an actual product. And if no one's familiar with that, like I said, it's the same thing as Windsurf. If you're familiar with those, OpenAI just bought Windsurf for like a few $1 billion. I think they're trying to figure out how to embed it in their front end or whatever's going on there. But that's an interesting kind of thing to see happen in industry. But Cursor AI, they're kind of like, I don't know the right analogy here, but like if you're a hardcore dev, you always probably like dev'd in like a notepad. You were like, oh, I don't need that big IDE. You were like, I'll just build it. That's kind of the feeling that I get when I'm using like Cursor AI. It's kind of like the go-to for like hardcore devs that like seeing behind the scenes, a lot more of the options. It's a lot more customizable, if you will. I hate using that word. But there's a reason that that's my go-to though. And that's because while it is just an IDE, and even OpenAI just recently in the last couple months, I think, added this to their front end, this thing called MCP servers. So MCP servers, like I said earlier, they're like adding a little toolkit to your development environment to expand its capabilities. So it's no longer just creating code. It can actually build databases. It can attach to websites. It can create accounts. It can create databases. Like there's nothing out there that I have found that this thing can't do at this point. And it's all configurable within your development environment. So if you can imagine building your perfect development environment with all of the tools that you know and love, that you're familiar with, that has helped you get through every big build, you can essentially build them all into your like AI agent inside of your IDE now. So it's become extremely proficient to use Cursor. So ChatGPT, Cursor, and then there's like some other tools that are more like you were referring to earlier, the wrappers. Companies that are looking for like training videos. Obviously, there's some video generators out there that we probably familiar with. Synthesia is kind of one of the big ones right now. They give you avatars that look just like all three of us on this video right now, and I swear you can't tell that they're not human. Like if it's like high quality HD, 4K, 8K, whatever it is, videos, perfectly synced. You can give it scripts. So video generation tools, Synthesia is typically my go-to. And then another one that just showed up was Colossian. I think that's how you pronounce it. And that's more for like corporate training because of the knowledge checks. So Colossian has taken basically what Synthesia was doing and put kind of those old school .NET Windows 95 training checks in the middle of your nice new videos. So it's kind of cool to see that happening, and it's obvious that they're doing it for corporate America, But then I have Leonardo, I think it's what's called .ai, and that's for very specific image generation. So when I'm building video games and I need specific assets for scenes or player models or something like that, I go to Leonardo so that I can perfect exactly what I'm about to generate. So image generation, definitely Leonardo. ChatGPT does great, but and I know recently they upgraded it so you can actually modify certain parts of the image. But if you're trying to seed an image through a series of generations, Leonardo's like the go-to there. And then you have residual tools that aren't necessarily AI, but really just models, LLMs, if you will, that you feed all of these things through that you can find on Hugging Face. Hugging Face has so many different models for so many different use cases. Like right now, I'm trying to learn how to build my own custom avatar. And I'm using models that I found on Hugging Face along with instructions and everything else to kind of do that. So there's like a whole plethora of like tools out there that can really enable people to build anything that you can imagine, and it's just a matter of finding the right tools that are out there.
Yeah, I think it's super interesting, right? Because I think it's, how would I say it? It's an interesting paradigm where the tools are evolving so fast, but at the same time, you want to be either a master of the tools, or I guess in order to build other tools, at least in the manufacturing space for the people on the plant floor. So it becomes one of those questions: do you build shovels and bring the shovels to the team, or do you want to be the guy with the best shovel on site, you know, sort of leading the change, so to speak? So I wrestle with that idea as well, right? Because again, the tools are changing so fast, it's almost difficult to stay up to speed on all of them. But at the same time, you need to pick and choose your battles, maybe where to focus and what do you want to specialize in. So I'm curious maybe what your thoughts are on that side when it comes to maybe the context of industrial manufacturing and which tools you've seen sort of benefiting the most. So you mentioned training. I think opportunities are going to be there for sure. I think there's a lot of agents on the sales and marketing side that will be interesting. But also, you know, software development, I think is a cool area to explore as well.
Yeah, and I'm gonna butcher this analogy, but what you were just saying reminded me of it. But it's like if you give a guy a fish, he'll eat for a night, but if you teach him to fish, he can eat forever.
Mm, yep. Yeah.
That's kind of the approach to technology that I take. I'm on the latter side of that.
Mhm.
I have tools that can teach me basically how to manipulate any technology into whatever kind of product I'm trying to figure out. I have yet to hit a roadblock with any of it. The difference is how much time am I willing to spend to learn how to build these different tools. And that's where you
Mhm.
start picking up the different tool sets. That's why people go to Hugging Face because they might not want to learn how to actually build a LLM. They might not have the resources to do it, but there's so many models out there, all kind of customized for certain things that you can basically get them all for free without having to rebuild them. But as long as you know where to go to find them, then you're still golden. To your second point, there's a lot of different use cases. We may have like centered around development for this conversation. You even mentioned training being one of them. And I'm going to do a shameless plug here for a kid that I know that recently, or I will say he's been through some hard times over the last year trying to release his tool and
Mhm.
landed on his feet in the best way. But in doing so, he released a tool that was originally seen in a very negative connotation. Like it got him kicked out of school, got offers from, maybe some of the fan companies rescinded. Um,
I know who you're talking about then. Yes, I've
yeah,
read some of the stories.
yeah. But that kid, released a technology that you will probably see show up more and more and more over the next 5 years. I've been using it. And I've been using it for a number of different things. I'm not going to go into like all of the different things because, and I'm laughing about it a little bit just because ethically there's a lot of questions that need to be addressed when these tools are coming out. And what I do is I push them to the limit so that I can understand when you're bringing these tools in, it's not just face value. Hey, you've got a new AI tool. No, it's going to bring in things that you're going to have to worry about with data privacy. So this tool, Cluely, in case anyone is curious about it, it just overlays your screen. But if you're a sales guy and you're trying to make a sale, and this thing is bringing up your product catalog in front of you real time, and it's not interfering with anything else, and it's just listening to you talk, that is such an advantage in sales. Like that is a crazy advantage in sales. I mean, even in marketing, and I hate that they kind of pigeonhole him into like a cheating tool, but he has kind of changed how universities and companies and just the whole online schooling thing is going to go. Like it's just going to have to change. It's like Napster in the 90s. Like you couldn't stop people from stealing music. Like this is the same analogy. Like there's very few times in my life, and I've been in technology for a long time, where I have to stop and say, wow, things are changing. And right now, they are changing so fast that this is probably the first time I can't keep up with all of it happening across the entire industry in so many different ways. And his tool's just one of them. Because now you have a tool that can look at your screen, and regardless of what's on it, it can interpret it. So we like giving like use cases that may ring true to a lot of people. It's like a lot of marketing stuff, but it does a lot more than that. Like think of anything that you're trying to do, and now you have an AI thing staring at your screen that can see what you're doing and probably understand what you're doing and help you work through it. I'm not talking like textbook examples either. I'm not going to give all the examples, but like there's a lot of examples out there. Even to your point earlier about Rockwell ladder logic, that's probably one of them. Like I haven't tested that, but I'm willing to bet if you have his tool overlaid on RS Logics, that it's going to be, oh yeah, that's
Hmm.
an XIO right there. You need to close that. It might be able to interpret it. I honestly don't know, but I can think of a bunch of different ways to use that tool.
Gotcha.
I think it's interesting. I don't really want to get into the ethical sides of those things because that in and of itself is a large conversation. But
Yeah,
I 100% agree with Billy on the fact that the world is changing and the world is very different than the pre-Napster days or even the Napster days
yeah.
of worlds gone by pre-Wikipedia and everything along those lines. I we have we have a question from Mahal. What about using reinforcement learning for process manufacturing optimization? Billy, I don't know if you have thoughts on that. That is the by far most specific question. We've had lots of people to say hi, but
Yeah.
that is by far the most specific question we have. And I don't know if you've used tools for something like this. If you have, I would love to get kind of your initial thoughts.
Well, I'll take that question at face value. I am not an expert in machine learning, but the question screams machine learning.
Mhm.
It's, reinforcement learning for process manufacturing optimization, right? So you're talking about optimizing manufacturing processes. That just means that you're collecting data points across an entire process at different points, could be a number of different operations, and you're using that data to increase efficiencies in one way or the other. Maybe you're
Mhm.
looking for bottlenecks, maybe you're trying to increase throughput, kind of the same thing, but at the end of the day, it's the same thing. You feed those data points through a machine learning algorithm, and then it's going to, probably be pushed into some AI model that gives you some context around how to interpret that data.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Um, but it's no different than what we've been talking about with things like Hugging Face. There's a million different LLMs out there that can ingest, say, process data. Um, I haven't looked specifically for those types of tools, but would find it difficult to believe that there's not one out there where someone has fed a very straightforward process into one of these LLMs and it can actually give you context around the data that it's ingesting.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I've played with it a little bit. I don't have any good results able to share. I know some people who have played with similar tools. I don't have any to recommend at this point, but I think that is an interesting concept. I do want to ask you kind of one question, but before we hit all of the final questions that we ask all of our guests, Billy. And instead of going and talking about change management and things that could go well or things that couldn't go well, we've already talked about that a little bit. Let's ask the question of what can an organization do to help with adoption of these new tools and maybe to help with adoption of these new tools and technologies in a way that will allow them to continue to support that into the future if the technologists and engineers stay in their role, or perhaps if the technologists and engineers move on and they have different people in those roles.
Yeah, so this kind of goes towards the conversation earlier where, you're talking about internally or externally.
Mhm.
You want your company, let's just talk in general. Your company wants to use these technologies to gain a competitive advantage.
Mhm.
You have one of two choices: internal resourcing or external resourcing.
Mhm.
Now, for the sake of argument, let's just say internal is how they want to do it. How can they safely do this? That means that they'll have to have a leadership team with someone. Could be one person, could be multiple people. I'm not trying to prescribe how companies operate with anything that I say, but in general, they'll have to have the expertise at the leadership level that's
Mhm.
trusted so that they can advise leadership on the right path forward.
Mhm.
And that word trust, that's the most important piece. Like the person has to have that background or the experience in these technologies so that when they say, the technology does one thing or is a certain way, that could be taken at face value. Otherwise, you end up in kind of those loops where you're having to explain down to the very granular detail exactly how an LLM might work. And
Mhm.
you're never going to make progress if it's like that, which is why trust is such an important thing when you're trying to adopt these tools, especially if you're trying to become, say, an AI first organization. If you don't have the right leadership in place, the people that are actually going to be doing the work and using the tools will never get there and never get access to them.
Let me ask you, Billy, a slightly different question before the wrap up on Dave's side, right? So I guess I read through that ethical case, and my question is not necessarily around ethics, but still relates, I guess, to what that application was doing. It's more about the technical boundary of AI and GPTs in a general sense, right? So I've been thinking a lot about this, and if I was to look at, I guess, a new research paper or white paper in the past, a lot of it was obviously was taken from some other works, but a lot of it should have been an original idea, right? It seems that in the world of AI, a lot of times people will assume just because it means generative, it still means that it has, I guess, taking a lot of that information from sources and obviously spun it, right, and maybe wrote it in a different, I want to say, context. But to me, it's not necessarily generating maybe that idea that is completely novel. So it almost seems like we will plateau or reach some kind of a, I want to say, glass ceiling at some point. So I'm curious how you think, is there a technological barrier at one point with AI? Are we just going to have, such an abundance of different software built using AI or wrappers that we're no longer making progress? And what is it going to maybe take to breach that? Is that creativity? So software engineers, instead of being more technical, are just going to become creatives, right? Like it could be a reverse to some extent. So I'm curious on your thoughts about that.
No, you're absolutely right. Like, there's definitely a ceiling to what these things can do. It's just like any
Mhm.
technology. Think of land cabling. Land cabling's been around for 30, 40 years and still, it's topped out at like 10 gigs throughput. So they
Mhm.
had to come up with like fiber. Now fiber might have a much larger capabilities. I don't know what it is off the top of my head, but I know it's larger throughput than land, right?
Mhm.
So GPTs are like, and I just read a paper about this like 2 days ago, I think. So it's kind of cool that you're asking about it. But GPTs have advanced so fast in the last 5 years that we're probably pretty rapidly getting to what that ceiling is going to look like. I'm just going to guess, we're probably at like the 90% level, right? And in engineering, or let's just, forget the guess, let's just assume that we're like at the 90% level of capabilities of GPTs. In engineering, there is no such thing as 100%. There just isn't.
Mhm.
Right.
Even with website uptime, 99.99999 percent uptime, and that little bit at the very end actually becomes very large in the grand scheme of time bound series. That one figure might be the difference between 1 hour downtime and 1,000. Just using loose numbers here. Now with
Mhm.
GPTs, if we're at like that 90% range, there's still capabilities that we're going to be able to squeeze out of it that we probably haven't figured out yet. Um, I can tell you one off the top of my head that I know they're going to have to figure out somehow, way, shape, or form, which is the context window. And
Mhm.
if you've used generative AI, especially for large projects, for any number of hours, you realize that that context window, depending on how much you're interacting with it, is actually relatively small if you're trying to
Yep.
build something real. And it will reset itself. It will forget what it's doing. It will forget what your file structure looks like. Uh, and I'm going to call Cursor out on this one. They even put automatic resets in theirs, which is the most infuriating thing I've ever dealt with development. So when you're in the middle of a build and it automatically resets, you kind of have to warm it back up. Like, I actually create warm up documents for like certain checkpoints so that if it does reset, I can just feed it my warm up document of everything that we just did for the last, say, 4 hours. And it gets me back on track. So that ceiling, we're kind of already at it. We're trying to break through it. And one of the biggest drawbacks is like kind of that context window And what if essentially is going to come down to like token usage. You start getting into kind of the theory of what it takes to actually run these things. And I think they're called transformers is what the industry is actually going for, but it's basically how much energy it takes to convert or to get these answers out of the languages, or out of the models, I mean. But yeah, like that glass ceiling, we're pretty close to it. I think we're going to get some more juice out of it. But really, where we're going to see the innovation is where MCP servers and things like that come in. And to your point, Vlad, once we start adding all these tools to this tool bag that we now have, more people are going to be able to do these things that they're seeing us do, and it's going to become more common. So you'll see a lot of the capabilities spread across the industry, like really start to increase. More people being able to do the same things that we're already doing these days. But to get above that, I'm not really like sure. We're about to see it start getting embedded in robotics. I think the GPTs are actually going to max out, but when they start putting those humanoid robots that I see like Tesla building and Nvidia and all of these humanoid companies around the planet, once we start seeing those hit the floor and they start getting real physical feedback into these large language models, we're going to see like a completely different type of civilization. And I hate like sounding sci-fi there, but we're going to see that in our lifetime.
I'm curious to see it. Absolutely. I think it's an interesting phenomenon. I'm also, so by the way, next week we have Sean Dotson, who's a very, I would say, outspoken person on robotics and has interesting opinions on humanoids, or has had a lot of interesting opinions on humanoids. So I'm curious to see what he says on that side as well, because it's, I feel it almost like looking at GPTs, where the first 6 months of GPTs, no one believed they were gonna take over and be as utilized as they are. I feel in robotics it just took a lot longer, right? Because humanoids started being developed like 6, 8, even before that in terms of years.
Oh,
And
years.
so it's exactly, for years. Like, well, everyone wants, what I mean, an exoskeleton. Who wouldn't want to have a complete like superpower where you're able to lift whatever? So it's I feel like humans have been trying to do that for decades. But anyways, I think like the shift of the mindset is shifting. Actually, I spoke to a friend of mine who works at Tesla, who went to visit a humanoid facility, and it made him like quote unquote realize how little he knows on robotics in terms of what those guys are doing and what they're developing. It's in his words, incredible to see the advancements on the humanoid side. So yeah, I think you're definitely right.
That's how I felt that the night that I told you that I engaged with ChatGPT for the first time, and I really drilled it on what I do, like down to the detail. Like we're talking granular details, like things that you would do in your day-to-day, information that you would have to put together, and it knew it all. And I was just like, okay, the game just changed. And if I went into a humanoid robot facility, and I've already seen videos out there, I would feel like I already know. Like I would not.
He told me the videos don't do it justice. He's like,
No.
Vlad, look, the videos, forget the videos. If you go there in person, it's night and day. But anyways, that's a conversation, I guess, for another day. But super interesting topic as well.
That is really interesting. I, for one, am not interested in the exoskeleton that may or may not just go break every bone in someone's body. But I'm excited to go see Billy and Vlad in exoskeletons. I will happily be there as they go arm wrestle the humanoid robots in their exoskeletons in the hopefully very distant future.
Hey, real fast, Dave. Real fast. Have you seen that movie Real Steel?
Mm-hmm. Yes,
I have not.
I
have played Mech Warrior.
One of the guys that I'm following very closely and watching daily is building a fighting robot, just like in that movie. And he's teaching it to use swords. He's teaching it to box, and every week it gets better and better and better and better.
I do have vague fever dreams of the movie I, Robot, in which I'm fairly confident a robot can kill a human. And so I again, I don't know. It is a future that we will probably be part of. I'm just not sure I'm excited about it, Billy. I am maybe more terrified on the Skynet side of excited about that. Having said that, thank you everyone for all the chats and comments. Billy, we want to make sure to go ask you all of the final questions we get to ask all of our guests. And for our longtime listeners, you guys know that the predict the future question is one of the most fun that I have. This is perhaps one of the most scary people that we can go ask to predict the future. But Billy, can you give us your future predictions? Typically, I say like on the AI side in the next 3 to 5 years, but I mean 3 to 5 years, none of us have any idea what it's going to be. So, can you give us some future predictions of what we're going to see on the AI side in the industry, please?
Yeah, this is honestly like I'm probably going to sound crazy here, and I'm okay with that. But within 5 years, like we will have a large impact to the industry in terms of job security because of the use of AI tools. We're already starting to see it. If anybody has been watching Microsoft, Amazon, any of them like Google, they have been laying off people by the thousands. There are literally thousands of amazing software developers, engineers out there right now looking for jobs, hoping to land something. And so if anyone knows any of those kids, grab them up because they're going to help you and your company, whoever they go to work for, they're going to help that company out. And essentially, we're just going to keep seeing that over and over and over again. These large language models, they're not a trivial technology. They are very capable. They can give you very useful information. So 5 years, like you will start seeing a much larger impact than what we've seen in the last year alone. 10 years out, having them embedded in the humanoid robots like we were just talking about, 10 years out, most people will probably be working with humanoid robots. Like I've seen them in facilities. I have seen many companies training them on the most mundane things. Now, whether or not people, feel like they're protected in their specific space, should do some research and see what is actually available today and capable. Welding humanoid robots. We've all seen this one too. Robots folding towels. It's the most silly thing, but that's somebody's job that these robots can now do. Like that's a reality, and we're going to keep seeing more and more and more of that capability show up. So 10 years from now, we will be coexisting with many different, call them real life assistants. Not really sure what they're going to be called by then, but 20 years out, we are all probably going to be trying to figure out what it means to exist. Like, and I'm not saying like we're all going to get wiped out kind of way. I just mean if we don't have to do these jobs that we've had the last 100 years, what are we going to be doing with our time? What will society be like in terms of how do we have an income? How do we pay our bills? Are we going to have bills? These are all like very like kind of crazy questions to have to ask yourself in the terms of not having jobs available to work. So what does society become, and how do we support ourselves, and how do we live, and what does our day-to-day lives look like in 20 years? Because I don't think it's going to look like it is today.
Interesting. I don't know if I'm excited or terrified, Billy. So we're just going to go move on from that prediction. But we do thank you for that prediction. We've got a couple of questions in the comments, guys. So we'll get back to those questions after the show. Next question I want to ask Billy is on the career advice side. If someone is looking to get into AI, or someone is looking to get into and learn some of these tools for their jobs, what are your suggestions for going in and starting to learn? Is there a place that you would suggest? A couple of places you would suggest? What's the best advice you have for folks?
Honestly, if people aren't already interacting with these things, I would encourage them to. And I know there's people out there that are like, oh, I'm never going to use that kind of technology, or I don't want to use it, or I've never used it. They just don't care about it in general, and that's fine. But if you're trying to get into the industry, it's going to be imperative to understand what these things are capable of. And there's no book or website or YouTube video out there that's going to be able to explain to you what the capabilities are. That is a hands-on, get down and dirty, start learning yourself what it can actually do. and everybody learns differently. And I said it earlier too, and I'll repeat it. Having a tool develop your curriculum for you and be able to walk you through the examples and actually build it out, that's the best. When I had that realization, I was like, wait a minute, I can build my own curriculum. When I had that realization, which was literally maybe 9 months ago, when it clicked, and I was just like, wait a minute, I can build all of this. It was so eye-opening, and I've learned so much in the last 9 months, which is, kind of feeding my hysteria prediction that I just gave you. It's like, if you start learning about these technologies and you see what they're capable of, like, it's hard not to understand what the impact to society is going to be. So, to anyone wanting to learn, you just got to jump in, start using, whatever preference you have: ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, Grok, Cursor, Windsurf. There's a bunch of tools out there, and if you Google the leading ones, that's probably the best place to start, just because they have the biggest user base, the biggest community, and you will find other people, other kids that are using those tools that can help you. And and if you genuinely like what you do and you're in those communities, they are the most supportive people that I've ever worked with. And these kids are half my age, and I love working with them. So.
No, I think that's really interesting. I appreciate that, Billy. Next question is: do you have a book or a content piece of recommendation for us? Could either be in the direction of the conversation we're having, or something else that you enjoy.
I saw that question on there, and I thought about it all day long, and I just don't have a book recommendation. What I do have, though, is if you're genuinely interested in AI in any context, start researching how they can possibly benefit you. Or, you can Google it if you're like old school. And I'm not sure if anyone knows, but Google is losing market share to OpenAI by the hour. Google's still number one, but OpenAI is going to catch up so fast. But in general, just start reading about these technologies, because whether we believe the impact or not, whether we, can say mass hysteria stuff and people believe it, at the end of the day, it's not going to matter, because it's going to start showing up in your everyday life. It probably already has in one way, shape, or form. Even if you're like using Siri or Alexa, that's basically generative AI things, just reaching back to models and giving you information. It's the same thing. And that's only going to proliferate over the next 10, 20 years. It's going to get more embedded in your life, whether you're going to see it around your work. Just start educating yourself, and whatever that means to whoever's listening, just start learning about it.
No, that's awesome, Billy. Thank you so much. This has been a really interesting, informative, slightly terrifying conversation, at least for me, and probably for all the listeners. Last question we have for you is: how can those listeners help? If you haven't completely terrified people, how can they help? Should they reach out? What sort of conversations are you looking for? Kind of your open platform to make any ask that you'd like to make.
I've had a bunch of people reach out to me over the last 6 to 9 months. It's actually, it's been quite amazing, kind of some of the responses that I get from my community, just people in industry, just curious about really everything they kind of see me doing. So if anyone is genuinely interested in having a conversation and just wants to ask questions or ask me how to do something, it doesn't matter what it is. If you want to talk, reach out to me on LinkedIn. We can schedule some time, and I can walk you through anything that you're curious about.
Awesome. Billy, thank you so much. This has been super awesome. Everyone, thank you for hanging out. We definitely have some new folks that I don't typically recognize in the chatting with us. Thank you all for your questions. Again, if we haven't gotten back to them, we'll get back to them after the live show. If you guys have made it this far, thank you so much for listening. Please remember to follow Billy and Manufacturing Hub Network, as well as Vlad and myself, on LinkedIn, on YouTube, on basically anywhere that you guys are currently finding us. You can go ahead and follow if you made it this far on podcast format. go subscribe, go follow along, go rate us 5 stars, go make sure that we have more downloads. Make sure that you have these episodes downloaded into your earbuds every Thursday, typically. At some point, I think we are now several episodes behind again, and so we probably have to start releasing more than once a week because we got a bunch of other fun, super content coming out as well. And if you guys have enjoyed, please come join us next week, same place, same time. The end of June, we're talking all about robotics for the second 2 weeks, which should hopefully be slightly less scary, at least as informative, hopefully slightly less scary than the AI side. Yeah, Billy is questionable. I'm also questionable because I know what those people are going to go talk about.